Hello and welcome to Obscure Movie Reviews, where we take a look at some of the more unknown and ambiguous titles in cinema history. Here we focus on movies that are hard to find, on the older side, relatively unknown, or perhaps they simply lack in popularity. So, pour the brandy and look sharp as we search for the unseen in The Invisible Woman. When rich playboy Richard Russell goes flat broke due to his hard partying lifestyle and a collection of lawsuits from the previous ladies in his life, he sees his last hope in the invention of his friend Professor Gibbs. The professor states that he has invented a machine that will turn people invisible and that it will make them all rich. The only thing the professor needs is a volunteer, which he finds in the form of fashion model Kitty Carroll. But Kitty has reasons of her own for wanting to be invisible, and soon the antics ensue. The Invisible Woman is the third entry in Universal's Invisible Man Saga, and the one that feels most out of place, mostly because the others are often considered horror films, or at least science fiction dramas, whereas The Invisible Woman is unquestionably a comedy. There are definitely some talented people running around on the set of this movie, but unfortunately, they're often overlooked in favor of the leading players who are serviceable enough, but not really top of the line. Virginia Bruce is Kitty Carroll, the Invisible Woman, who is often a leading lady in B-rated films and usually pushed to the background of mainstream movies, and it's easy to see why. Her performance is a little forced, and when invisible, she lacks the necessary intensity in her voice to really bring the performance across.
Oh, this is gonna be good. Whoopee!
John Howard as Richard Russell also comes across basically stiff and disinterested in everything. He had seen success early in his career as Bulldog Drummond in a series of movies of the same name, but later in life would find more of his time spent on television. The real star power comes from the supporting cast with the famous John Barrymore as Professor Gibbs. Barrymore had made a name for himself as one of the earliest silent film stars and had notably played Jekyll and Hyde. This was one of his last films, capping off his career. Oh, and randomly, Shemp Howard, one of the many Three Stooges, has a small role as one of the bumbling gangsters. And Margaret Hamilton, who famously portrayed the Wicked Witch of the West, plays the professor's unappreciated assistant. The interactions between Barrymore and Hamilton are by far the funniest parts of the movie. Unfortunately, the all-star cast in the background can't pull the film out of mediocrity, so the acting will only receive a 5 out of 10 for being average. The film's pacing is a bit sketchy. Overall, this is more due to having too many storylines going on at once and not having them all be equally interesting. At some point, you start wondering when everything is going to wrap up. Toward the end of the film, the ending seems to take a long time to conclude, and you start wondering why the characters are making the decisions they're making. This is helped by the fact that the runtime is only an hour and 12 minutes, but to have a movie that short, have so many scenes that feel like they're not going anywhere, is a bit of a problem, so it'll get a score of 3 out of 10 for not having good pacing. This is an area where the movie shines. Coming off the two previous Invisible Man films, Universal had basically perfected their invisibility effects, making these some of the cleanest effects yet. It also had one of the largest budgets for a Universal film at that time, and it shows in the special effects because they're top-notch. The camera work is sort of a strange combination of romantic and slapstick comedy styles, and kudos to some of the really awesome stunts in this film. That guy really took that fall. There's a great combination of practical effects as well as photographic tricks that make the film visually interesting, thus awarding it an 8 out of 10 for having some really good cinematography. The musical score is a combination of sweeping romantic tracks, mixed with goofy slapstick tunes and cartoonish sound effects. The Three Stooges vibe is very present, made all the more apparent by having an actual stooge on set. I get what they were going for, but I don't think it always works. Despite it being a comedy, I still want to feel like I can take a movie seriously as a whole, and I really struggle with this, and the soundtrack is a big reason for it. The soundtrack adds a lot in some places and really detracts in other areas, giving it a 5 out of 10 for being average. The story is a bit disjointed at best. In one corner, you've got Richard Russell losing his fortune and hoping the professor's invention will put him back on top. Then you got the professor's weird relationship with his housekeeper and him trying to find a test subject and being disappointed that it's a woman. Then you've got Kitty and her vendetta against her cruel boss at the fashion building. There seems to be some strange subtext about classism that you think is going to come into play, but it never really does. Plus, a strange subplot that drinking alcohol makes the invisibility last longer. Then you've got Blackie, the gangster, who's in Mexico and wants the invisibility machine for himself so he can sneak back into the country, which actually might have been the plotline with the most potential. I kind of feel like this movie started off as several different scripts initially. This makes me a little sad because the story was written by Kurt Siedmach, a Universal mainstay who had written such gems as The Wolfman and The Invisible Man Returns. Parts of the story were also penned by Joe May, who had a long history as a writer and director and had also worked on the previous Invisible Man film. The issue probably came about with having 3 different screenwriters present. They lean heavily into the jokes about Kitty being naked while invisible, something brought up in all the Invisible Man films but never for comedic effect.
Here we go gathering nuts in May, nuts in May, nuts in May. Here we go gathering nuts in May on a cold and frosty morning. Whoop!
And while there are some funny and risque moments they play up with this,
The girl? Bring her over? Undressed?
they depend on the cheap joke of it a little too much.
You don't mean she's really...
Yeah, I mean she's really.
The ending is a bit anticlimactic and ends with a pretty bizarre one-off joke. It's hard to really include this movie in the Invisible Man series because it's so tonally different and has no connection to the previous movies or any of the subsequent ones. Overall, the story has too much going on and falls a little flat, and it'll get a 4 out of 10 for being below average. As a lot of comedies from this era go, if you're unfamiliar with the lingo and the style of throwing out quick one-liners on the regular, you might be able to glean something from a rewatch. But in general, I think once may be enough for most people. You might have an appreciation for the special effects, which is worth checking out over again, but overall, it'll get a 4 out of 10 for having below average rewatchability. This is probably my least favorite of the Universal Invisible Man saga. All of the other films make a point of trying to have shared continuity, at least to a degree, and there are certainly better comedic movies with invisible character plot lines. I certainly don't hate this movie, and I feel like it has merit in many areas, but for me, it rates below average, so I'd personally give it a 4 out of 10. That will bring the final score to a 4.71 out of 10, making it a below average to just average flick. I don't think you'd be wasting your time watching it, but don't keep your hopes too high. Thank you for checking out that obscure movie review. You can see our other obscure movie reviews on our page, and if you like content like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you can be up to date on the latest content that we have. Content just like this.